I'm going to do a brief introduction to Asker, who has already spoken once before on one of our webinars. Asker is based in Singapore and heads a consulting company made in Denmark there. He has been with us in South Africa on our Leading with Humanity program, so has a great affinity for what we do and here. And Asker, it's wonderful to have you back doing a session for us again today. I read somewhere recently that the shortest distance between two people is a story. And so I think it's very appropriate today that we examine the role of storytelling and how it can enhance what we do and how we go about it. So Asker, without any further ado, let's hand over to you. And we look forward to it. You're on mute, Asker.
Yeah, hope you can hear me now. Thank you, Pete, for those kind words, and thank you for inviting me again to do another presentation. As you said before, I did one before last year on critical thinking. Today, it's a completely different subject, but I'm just as excited to do this presentation as the one I did last year in May. And also thank you to you, Nicola, for organizing this. I really appreciate that very much. And certainly thanks to all of you for attending this presentation on storytelling. I'm so happy to see all of you. I have structured my presentation, or rather the next 60 minutes, into two parts. So I'll start off with my PowerPoint and my presentation in just a minute. I got approximately 25 slides. And I plan to speak for approximately 45 minutes. So that should leave us a little bit of time at the end for Q&A session. And I hope you will share your thoughts, your questions, and your feedback to what I'm presenting in just a minute. Should we need a little bit more time after 2 p.m. in South Africa, I'm happy to continue for another 10-15 minutes or so if we need it. So it's really up to you. But out of respect for your time, I'll try to stay within the time slot given. All right, so let me get my PowerPoint up on the screen here and share it with you. So here we go. So I've chosen to call my presentation, "It's not about perfection, it's about connection." And I'll get back to that in a few slides from now, because there's a clear purpose why I've called the presentation exactly that. When people hear the word storytelling, and certainly business people, they often become a little bit skeptical, because is this really something we should take serious as business people? I mean, storytelling is for children, right? It's the stories around the campfire that we listened to ourselves when we were children. So really, Asker, talking about storytelling in a business context? Well, I hope I can share with you in this presentation why I think it's a discipline that we should take dead serious as business people, and that it can really make a difference in your presentation, and certainly when you are connecting with people, be that business people or anybody else for that matter. So it's not about perfection, it's about connection. My agenda for the meeting is, the presentation is rather simple. I'll tell you first, what is storytelling? I'll tell you why I think it's important. And I'll tell you how you can easily become better storytellers. And then, as I said before, we'll end this with a Q&A. You're welcome to share or write your comments and your questions in the chat box already, and then we'll pick them up at the end. Or you can just hold them until then, and then ask me when I'm done with my presentation. Okay. So just a few words about myself before I start the presentation. I don't think I have much to add to what you already said, Pete, but I'm Asker. I'm 59 years old. I've got 36 years of experience working in the business world, in advertising agencies, in consultancies, in a think tank, and for the past 12 years, running my own business, first in Copenhagen in Denmark, and now in Singapore. And I'm joining you tonight, my time from Singapore. So work experience from both Europe and Asia. And you can see here I've included my company website address and also my LinkedIn profile if you want to know more. But I'll stop it there because I think it's more important and more interesting to talk about the subject of storytelling. So let me start with the what. And what I want to do is, rather than trying to give you a definition of what storytelling is, and I'll be happy to do that later, but I think it's more appropriate and hopefully also more helpful if I actually share a story with you. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll share you a story, and it's a rather long story, and I'll get to why I'm sharing this story at the end of the story. So bear with me for a few minutes before I reveal with you why I'm sharing this exact story. Okay, here we go. This is a boarding school in Denmark called Stenhus Kostskole, and I went there in secondary school 45 years ago. And as you can see, it looks like a very nice school. And indeed, it was. And some of the teachers were very nice. But unfortunately, there were quite a lot of teachers who were not, who were actually, almost vicious. They would humiliate us. They would taunt us, mock us, belittle us. Some of them would even hit us, slap us. And I remember one specific day, and that was in 1976 when I was 13 years old. We were having math, and when the class started, my good friend Peter, he was tilting on his chair, and the math teacher told him, Peter, all 4 legs on the floor. And Peter said, but I already have 4 legs on the floor. What he meant was the 2 back legs of his chair and his own 2 feet. And we all thought it was funny, and we laughed. Now, obviously, that's not what the teacher meant. And he thought we were laughing at him. And he was humiliated. So he walked all the way down to Peter, and he slapped him so hard that he almost fell off the chair. I still remember that day, so many years later. And why am I telling you this story? Because approximately 12 years later, I was at an interview at a business school. I was working full-time after my degree from business school myself. So I was working full-time in an advertising agency. But I had this crave to also teach myself part-time in the evening. So I applied for a position at a business school in Copenhagen. And then the principal asked me, why should I hire you, Maske? And I told her the story that I just told you. But I also told her that I had promised myself that if I should ever get the chance to teach, I would see it as a privilege. I would do my very best to create a nice, inclusive environment where all the students would feel safe and happy. She hired me. So did this story make a difference in that particular situation? Yes, it did. I was hired because of this story. Now, obviously, it was not the only reason, because I would never have been invited for the interview if I didn't meet, the criteria. So obviously, she had seen my CV before, but she invited me for an interview based on that, but she hired me based on the story. We really connected, and she could see that I was honest, and I really meant it. I think, she felt that. And so I started. So unfortunately, a lot of business people, they are not very good storytellers. they prefer to stand behind a podium, read from a script, or share a PowerPoint with lots of bullet points. And they do it because they think they need to be perfect. Deliver a flawless presentation without any mistakes. So they'd rather than have an eye contact with their audience, they would rather read from a script and read it from one end to the other. And they would think they did an fantastic job because they did it without making any mistakes. Now, what they didn't observe, or they often don't observe, is that they lost the connection with their audience, or they never had it in the first place. And what happens is that, first of all, if you are reading from a script, why don't you just give it to me? Because I can probably read it faster myself than I can listen to you read it out loud. And secondly, I didn't come to hear you read a script. I came here to experience you and hear your experience about the topic that you're talking about. But so you stand instead, and then you're standing behind a podium, you're creating an artificial distance between us. So, instead, business leaders, executives, any presenter should walk away from that podium and allow themselves to be vulnerable. You should watch this video on YouTube by this professor called Brené Brown from the University of Houston in Texas. She did a YouTube or TEDx talk, which you can find on YouTube, which has been watched by 20 million people. She talks about the power of vulnerability, about our courage or our need to have the courage to be imperfect. Because people would rather that you are imperfect, not because they are looking for your imperfection, but they would rather see a human than some robot reading from a script. So vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen and not having control of the outcome. So speak from your heart instead of speaking from a script. And you'll see and you'll notice a difference in the reaction from your audience. They will actually listen. They will pay attention and they will applaud you, even if you make mistakes, which you will, and which I'm doing tonight as well. I am making mistakes. And I'm not reading from a script. And I'm trying to look into the eyes, or anyway, into the camera to give you that kind of feeling that I'm looking at you. And I'm not behind, I obviously hiding behind a computer screen, but I'm certainly not standing at a podium, right? Allow yourself to be vulnerable, and it will pay off. People will listen to your story instead of checking their phone or talking to the person sitting next to them. I want to share another quote with you. This one from an American poet and civil rights activist called Maya Angelou. You might have heard of her. I love this quote. And she says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And this is where storytelling becomes important. And, I'm trying to look into the camera, as I said, but I'm also trying to keep an eye on you, as the audience. And I think I have the feeling that when I shared my story before, you were actually paying attention, right? You were not checking your phones. Because we are all wired for stories. It's not something which, is only for children, it's for adults as well, and business people included. Why should you care about storytelling? I want to share with you a short video. It's just 1.5 minutes long. There's no sound. And it's an experiment all the way back from 1944, so almost 80 years old, by two American psychologists called Fritz Heider and Marianne Simmel. And while I show you the video, I want you to think about what you saw. Perhaps write it down. And then after this video, I'll tell you what happened and why I'm sharing this video with you and what it has to do with storytelling. And then when we get to the Q&A session, I will ask a few of you what you actually saw. So let's save that for later. But right now, concentrate on this experiment. So hang on a second. Here we go. 1.5 minutes. Just watch it. Think about what you see. That's it. What did you see? Well, don't answer me now, but think about it. Perhaps write it down. So why am I sharing you this? These two psychologists, they have shared this video sequence to thousands of people and asked them, what did you see? And people come up with all kinds of different stories of what they saw. One of them being, a man and a woman comes walking. And then they meet another man. And the other man, the two men, they get into a fight about over the woman. And at the end, the other man walks away with a woman. And the first man, is raging about it, and he's tearing down the house in anger. That's just one of the stories. What happens is completely coincidental. There is no story. It's just some, figures moving around on a white canvas. So what's the point here? The point is that, as I said before, we're wired for storytelling. So even when there isn't a story, people are trying to, make sense of what they see and see it in a context of a story. So they make up all kinds of stories about what happened. So why is this interesting? Because if you're standing there and doing a presentation and you are, being completely rational about it and sharing all your PowerPoints and just talking about your subject without, putting it into a context of stories, people will lose interest and they will start daydreaming and they will start making up their own stories. The only way you can connect with people is by, being a storyteller. That doesn't mean that you should not be serious about what you're presenting, of course, but put it in the context of a story and people will pay attention and they will not be checking their phone. They will not be looking at, or talking to their neighbor, and they will not lose interest. They will be listening intently to what you say. Another way of putting it, this book called Significant Objects by two American journalists called Walker and Glenn is about an experiment. They found out the exact value of a story. What they did was they took 100 objects. They went to a flea market, bought all kinds of junk, trinkets, a lamp, an old book, a doll, whatever you find at a flea market. And they bought it let's say, at a total price of $100. So 100 objects, $100. Then they took these objects back. And then they paired each object, each thing, to a professional writer. And they asked them to write a story about about this lamp, or this book, or this doll. So they did. Great stories. Very emotional stories. And then what Walker and Glenn did was they put all these objects on eBay. Same objects, nothing had changed. It was the same old lamp, same old doll, same old, book. But of course, they added the story to the object. So what happened? They sold all the objects at, if I remember correctly, $3,800. So the same thing paired with a story. What does that mean? It means that people buy the story. We don't need more stuff. We need more stories. It's a very interesting book, and it's some great writers contributed to this. Now, I'm not telling you that you should go out and make up stories. That's not the point. The point is to tell you that stories make a difference. You can see some of the writers here. I only knew one of them, Charles Baxter, highlighted in red here, who's an American novelist and poet. And, I've read a few of his books. So if he's a representative of all these different writers, it is, state of the art, great writers who contributed to this. I want to tell you another story. This is me in a slimmer edition, in a younger edition from 1987. Seriously working in my office, at my desk. So why am I sharing this photo with you? One of the subjects that I'm teaching is digital marketing. So I tell students about Facebook advertising, Google AdWords, LinkedIn marketing, SEO, search engine optimization, and what have you. And often I have the impression that certainly younger people, some of them think that digital marketing digital is not the messenger, it's the message. And I try to tell them, no, digital marketing is just a different media vehicle. It could be, TV, radio, outdoor, newspaper advertising, cinema, whatever. Digital is by and large only a media vehicle. And where does this picture of me come into that presentation? Well, you can see in 1987, I did not have a computer. I did not have a cell phone. I did not have Facebook, neither did you. I had an old typewriter. I had a fixed landline phone, and I even had a calculator. You can see it there as well. And then a lot of paper. The point is, we did great advertising back then. We didn't have digital marketing, but we still made great advertising, which moved people, which moved products, which created awareness, preference, and all the other keywords that we associate with marketing. So I tell people, or the students, before you start focusing on running a Facebook campaign, think about what is it you want to say, what is the message, and then think about, is that message, is Facebook the right media vehicle for that message? Or should you perhaps, think about other options as well? And then we have an interesting discussion around that. Sometimes I persuade them, sometimes I don't. But it's definitely an interesting discussion. So we have a lot of fun about that. So how do you become a better storyteller? I want to share another quote with you first, because I think it's so interesting, and I'll read it out loud for you. It's by the US President Theodore Roosevelt. He was the president in the US from 1901 to 1909, I think. And I don't know in which context he said this, but he said it. And it stuck with me, and I think it's so right. It's called The Man in the Arena. So let me read it out loud. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions? Who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. You know, coming back to the discussion about vulnerability. When you stand out there without a script, without a podium, naked on the scene in front of people, you will make mistakes. You will even sometimes perhaps make great mistakes. You might even, forget what you wanted to say. And there's no way back, there's no script. But what Theodore Roosevelt says, I think, is the credit still belongs to you because you were there. You stood out, you took the chance. Everybody sitting in the audience laughing at you. What risk did they run? None. Think about it. Try and put yourself in my shoe for a moment, right? I'm, as I said before, I'm doing a presentation without a script. I'm making mistakes. I'm doing this presentation in a language which is not my native language. I'm doing it 10,000 kilometers away. Right? But I'm still doing it. I'm taking that chance. I might fail, and I am vulnerable. And so will you be when you're standing there without a script. But you're still the one who did it. So you failed, so what? Even when you fail, you win. And you'll learn something which you can use the next time. So let them laugh. I will still salute you because you did it. And keep that in mind when you, the next time, dare to stand naked on the stage without a script, without, tons of bullet points on a PowerPoint. And do not try to be perfect. First of all, you won't be it. And even if you are, you lost the connection with the audience in the meantime. So take the chance, stand up, do your presentation, speak from your heart. Of course, you should, be prepared. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you shouldn't be prepared, but take the chance and then do it the best you can. And people will love you for it. I promise you. So how do you actually do it? First of all, make it personal. You heard me. I've shared 2 stories with you already. The advantage of making it personal is that here you definitely do not need a script because it's your story. You lived them. I mean, you remember them because you were there. You don't need to rehearse it. You don't need to script them. You just need to tell them. And, people will connect with you much more easily when you're sharing your personal stories than if it's some other person's story or generic story. So it's your story. Share it. Make it personal. Just like I tried to do with these 2 stories I've shared with you tonight or today, your time. Be specific. You know, as much details, or so, as many details as you can add. If you remember my presentation or my story about that boarding school experience, it was a math class. My comrade, my good friend was called Peter. It was in 1976. It was in September. It was this particular school. I was 13 years old. The more details you can add to it, the more credible becomes your story. And people will see, you know, of course, you know, if he was 13 years old, he remember that even 45 years later, and he was there in that particular school at that particular day in that particular year, you know, we believe him. He was there. He's not making this up. It was his story. It is his story, right? Be specific. The more details, the better. Present a conflict. All great stories are conflicts between good and evil, love and hate, what have you. My digital marketing presentation or story was, you know, digital versus other media channels, right? My story from the boarding school was create a safe environment or create an environment of fear, intimidation, horror. Always have a conflict. Now, recently, I watched Titanic, the movie from 1997 by James Cameron, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet as Jack and Rose. And you know the story. You know the ship is going down. So what keeps you? What keeps you in the chair for 2.5 hours? What keeps you there is the conflict between, will Rose choose Jack, the poor boy on third class, or will she go back to her rich fiance, Cal? And we watched that for 2.5 hours. It's a totally banal story and we love it. That's the power of storytelling, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't have to be complicated, just need to have a conflict. And we'll watch it. We'll pay money to go in and watch 2.5 hours of a totally banal story about, you know, boy meets girl. Right? And I even rewatched it. Right? Maybe you did too. Connect emotionally. So look at your audience, don't look at your script. Look them in their eyes. Speak from your heart. And people will take notice. And when you make a mistake, they'll love you even more. Because they understand that you're just a human. And they would probably, you know, have done, if not the same mistake, then another mistake. So don't try to be perfect. None of us are anyway. And of course, leave a takeaway. What is the point of your story? You need to be clear about why you're sharing a particular story. Otherwise, it's just a story. It needs to be in a context which is relevant. So if you talk about digital marketing, you can show the picture or a similar picture like the one I showed before. So make it personal, make it specific, present a conflict, leave a takeaway, stand out from the podium and speak from your heart. And then you will be a great storyteller. It's not complicated, but it takes courage. And it takes that you know, break away from that perception that you need to be perfect and that storytelling is only for children. And only if you present your presentation very rationally, are you being taken seriously? No, people are not even listening to you. You lost them. You lost them in the process of trying to be perfect. So again, it's not about perfection, it's about connection. I think I've got only a few slides left, so let me continue to that. with that. So a little bit more here. Here's Leonardo DiCaprio again. This time from another Hollywood movie called The Wolf of Wall Street from 2013 by Martin Scorsese, I think. It tells the story about a stockbroker. It's a real story, a stockbroker called Jordan Belfort, who ended up in prison because he cheated his way to the top in stockbroking. And in the process, he spent tons of money on drugs, on partying, on all kinds of things. And he ended up in jail. Now, why did he become successful? Because he was a great storyteller. He could persuade people to invest their money with him. Now, he comes out of jail at the end of the movie. And he's broke. But he's still a great storyteller. And the end scene of the movie is this scene where he's standing in front of 500 people, all listening intently and trying to become like Jordan Belfort. Not to cheat, but to have that ability to persuade people. So what Leonardo DiCaprio or Jordan Belfort does is he walks down to the first man on the first row and he hands him his pen. And he says to this guy, "Sell me the pen." And the guy, he does an awful job. He starts talking about, this pen can write. It's a beautiful pen. And Leonardo, he takes the pen away from him and hands it to the next guy, who's just as hopeless. None of them understand what it takes to sell a pen. It's not about its functionality. Of course, a pen can write. That's the entrance ticket to be a pen. So why should I buy this particular pen? Go online, go on YouTube and see different presentations of sell me this pen. You'll see some very good ones and you'll see some hopeless ones. But at least people are trying. It's a great movie, by the way. It's a crazy movie. If you haven't watched, go and watch it. You just don't believe your own eyes when you see what's happening in that movie. It's so bizarre. It's a lot of fun. If you want to know more, I would encourage you to start with these 3 books, or one of them. The one in the middle is probably the best one. Whoever tells the best story wins, by Annette Simmons. But we also have The Leader's Guide to Storytelling, or Lead with a Story. And there are other books about storytelling, but these are the ones I would recommend you to read if you are more interested in storytelling. So remember, storytelling, it started around the campfire for all of us, but it doesn't have to end there. You can take it into the boardroom. You can take it into your presentation on the big screen, a big scene, and you can take it anywhere. And every story, as long as it's specific, it's personal, it has a conflict, and it has a takeaway, and you do it from your heart, it's a winner. And even if it isn't, you are the man or the woman in the arena. So you can still clap yourself on your shoulder and say, "Hey, I did it." So go out and do it. I tell you, it will make a difference. I'm happy to hear some of your experiences with storytelling when we open up the floor in just a few minutes. If you want to know more about me, if I just may do a little bit of advertising about myself, check my website. You have it in my presentation. Maybe Nicola, if you will, you can share. You're welcome to share it afterwards with everybody. You can also check my LinkedIn site, website, and you can, on my website, you can find a soft copy of my book called Vantage Point, which also includes a chapter about storytelling. But besides that, a number of other business articles that I've written over past few years, and it's there free for everybody on my website. Besides that, I do 2 podcasts, weekly podcasts. It started with a podcast about Singapore literature, where I review books by Singaporeans, and I do a new episode every week. And that gave me kind of the interest to expand. And now, last month, I started a new podcast called Keep Playing, which is a podcast about what I think business can learn from the world of sports. And actually, the latest, and it's coincidental, I didn't plan it, but the latest episode, and you can find it on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon Podcast as well. The latest episode in Keep Playing is actually about South Africa and the Rugby World Cup win in 1995. So you'll have to listen to the episode to find out why this is relevant in a business context and what I think business can learn from that particular event. And likewise, there's a number of other episodes, and I keep posting new episodes every week. So, go on your preferred podcast host and find it there. That was it. That's all I have. But before I leave the floor to you, let me just stop sharing now. Yeah, hang on. Before I leave the floor to questions and comments, and I can see there's a few in the chat already. Did any of you write down what you think or you saw in that video sequence I showed you from Heider and Simmel? Anybody? And there's no stupid answers, I promise you. Are you shy to share?
Initially, I thought I saw a water can, and then just a whole lot of shapes.
But so you saw something, right? You actually try to look for something in that story, try to make sense of what is going on. So were you surprised when I told you there was nothing going on? It was just purely coincidental. Anybody else? Yeah, Steve, you raised your hand.
Yeah, Asger, I made up a whole book about that minute and a half. It had a lot of conflict. It had comparison. The big triangle showed dominance. There was hierarchy. They were fighting over scarce resources. Somebody left with the resource. And then there was just a massive amount of anger and turmoil at the end. So I had a long story. Thank you.
In just 1.5 minutes.
Yeah.
I applaud you. That was great. Yeah. You see, prove my point, I hope, that we're all wired for storytelling. So even when there isn't any, we still try to make sense of it. And, we'll make up our own story. We'll start daydreaming, right?